Okay, good morning, everybody. I still didn't hear you. Okay, so welcome, everybody. I'm Nick Booth. I work with UNDP in our Bangkok Regional Hub. That's UNDP for United Nations Development Program. We cover all of Asia Pacific. And enhancing access to justice, especially for people who can't afford a lawyer but need the law's protection most, is one of the things we focus on. So pro bono is really important for us because Asia is a very under-lawyered region, and the people who need law really can't afford lawyers, they can't find lawyers. So we really need, we're very encouraged to be part of the movement that is growing pro bono, when we get excited to see more and more people every year turn up to these conferences and to see this movement growing. And so I'm really happy that our plenary today, the only plenary that's kicking off our conference today, is about this key question about how we are going to help this movement go forward in Asia and how we are going to grow pro bono in Asia. But because pro bono involves lawyers working in private firms, giving up their time and devoting all of their energies to do pro bono work as well as carrying on their fee-paid work. The question is, how can they find the right atmosphere? How can we encourage firms to facilitate that work? Because if pro bono is going to work, then firms have got to take it on, they've got to commit to it, they have to facilitate it, they have to encourage it, and lawyers have to be able to really devote as much passion, as much time and energy to their pro bono clients as for their fee-paid clients without getting any kind of discouragement. So I have with me a great panel today, and we're going to ask ourselves, what is the business case for pro bono in Asia? Is it working? What can we do to help it work better? And so I have with me people from all over the world who are engaged in pro bono in Asia in different ways. And as we're in Indonesia, I want to start with Meli Dasa, who has her own law firm here in Jakarta. And Meli, I want you to tell us a little bit, if you will, tell us a bit about how you see pro bono in Indonesia. And what do you see as the business case for pro bono in Indonesia, and how is it developing?
Okay, well, pro bono actually in Indonesia has its roots from the legal aid movement that actually started during the New Order era. And basically the principles that basically we should as advocates give free service, legal service to the community that needs it, whether in civil and criminal procedures, is actually clearly stipulated in the advocates law. And therefore actually in principle pro bono is something that all advocates should be doing. However, of course there are certain challenges, but we see that actually there is actually firms that are actually more interested in doing pro bono work. Particularly, we find that the major firms now actually identify partners to allocate work for pro bono. However, I have to give a little bit of a background in this respect, in that you cannot talk about pro bono service without actually understanding that the legal profession in Indonesia has been historically quite fragmented. Even if you talk about lawyers, then you have to differentiate between those kind of lawyers that were traditionally the human rights legal aid lawyers, the cause lawyers, and then there are also the so-called practitioners in the courts versus the legal consultants, which all of them then became advocates in 2003 when we introduced the concept of the unified bar. Now, in that respect, traditionally in the New Order, those lawyers that actually did corporate work and which are now actually becoming transformed to become the big major players in legal service are traditionally headed by lawyers who have not really been involved in politics or hard social issues. They tend to be more quiet people that stay behind on safe issues that are non-confrontational with the government. And this is, of course, because actually the legal aid movement during the New Order was actually quite successful in pushing through major human rights initiatives such that the so-called Minister of Justice then became renamed as the Minister of Law and Human Rights, underlining the importance of human rights as an agenda of the country. Now, because of that, they actually are safety oriented. The kind of work that they do in pro bono tends to be more like those that are actually required for the foreign lawyers that work in their firms. Because foreign firms actually cannot establish a presence in Indonesia. They can only do so as an employee of an Indonesian firm. And in that capacity, they have to provide pro bono service at least 10 hours a month, and it is actually defined as primarily a legal education, giving basically seminars and teaching and training, and therefore are a regulatory reform. Therefore, these commercial firms, seeing what the expats do, also translate, and primarily because maybe they see a disconnect between the kind of work that they do every day with the work that actually is required by the justice seekers, they tend to focus more pro bono work in things that actually support the government, in doing regulatory reforms, in identifying certain issues that need to be explored further. But normally they tend to be economic issues, financial inclusion issues, or governance issues. But they don't tend to be at the core of human rights. But this is actually the pro bono that is being done by the firms. In addition to that, I think in our session in the afternoon, I think that the Indonesian pro bono section will actually share more about what actually pro bono work is being done, not only by the legal aid workers, but also through Paradi. Particularly interestingly, through actually, my understanding, is through actually local lawyers in the outside of Java that are closer to the communities that actually need help, such as migrant workers or female women issues. And apparently, although they actually are not supported by funding and user, they actually are very active in helping this. So actually, the passion and the determination to actually do good is actually there. But how do we actually mobilize the lawyers that actually really make the decision makers in the capital, and also control many of the transactions and many of the activities to actually be more involved with what is needed? I think that's what's at the situation in Indonesia right now.
Okay, thanks very much, Millie. So Millie's given us a key challenge, right? So how do we actually open up a space in those firms at the moment which are, maybe giving advice to government or doing, lectures, but are not really actually giving legal services to the poor who need it most? There are people who want to do it, but how do we facilitate that? I'm going to turn over to Nick Patrick now, who heads DLA Piper's corporate pro bono practice. And Nick, can you just tell us something about why did DLA Piper adopt the policy it has? What is the policy, first of all, and why is DLA Piper chosen? What is the business case for DLA Piper to support pro bono and incorporate it in the way that it has?
Thanks, Nick. DLA Piper wants all of our lawyers to do pro bono work wherever they are in the world. We believe it's an important professional responsibility. We want our pro bono practice to promote access to justice. It's very important for us that access to justice is at the core of our pro bono practice. As far as Asia is concerned, we've had a pro bono lawyer in China for about 10 years now. That lawyer has historically been focused mainly on assisting NGOs to establish themselves in China. In the last 12 months, we've appointed a full-time pro bono lawyer into Hong Kong. Annette Bain is our inaugural Asia Pro Bono Council based in Hong Kong. And we really want to expand our pro bono practice into Asia so that the pro bono practice in Asia is as strong as it is elsewhere in the world. So for us, it's very much about the values of the firm. It's about the culture of the firm. We're a firm that is a relatively young firm. DLA Piper has only existed since 2005. And it's a firm that's grown very quickly through mergers. And for us, pro bono is a way that we can create a very consistent culture and a very consistent set of values that sort of bring the firm and the people in the firm together. So those are some of the reasons why we do pro bono, but ultimately it's about professional responsibility and access to justice. And although Asia hasn't really been a priority for DLA Piper since 2005, it's really becoming a priority now. When you look at when we met as a pro bono team back in 2011 to sort of prioritise what we were going to do in our pro bono practice, we really wanted to strengthen pro bono in markets like Australia and the UK and the US, and Europe, and not just the UK but Europe more generally. And that's because there was a lot more internal and external pressures on us to have a strong pro bono practice in those places. Having achieved that over the last few years, I think we're now becoming more focused on Asia and on Africa. We sort of recognised we couldn't do everything at the same time, but Asia is definitely a priority for us at the moment. There's still a lack of internal and external expectation, I think, on law firms in Asia. I think we're perhaps the only international firm to have full-time staffing for pro bono in Asia, so it really shows you other firms are also prioritising other regions. But I think Asia, it's the right time now for law firms to start to focus on Asia. I think international firms in particular have sort of struggled in their Asia practices, not just in terms of pro bono, but more generally. They've been struggling to make a decent profit in Asia, to gain market share in Asia. And that's made it very difficult actually for law firms to do pro bono work in Asia. But I think the law firms are starting to, the international firms anyway, are starting to become more successful in Asia, more profitable. And it's the right time now to start to invest in pro bono and invest back into the communities.
Some people will say law firms are business enterprises. They're there to make a profit. You don't do something unless it's for the bottom line. So if you're doing pro bono, it must somehow be overall about your bottom line. What would you comment about that?
Well, we've certainly found that pro bono supports the bottom line. It's very helpful to our business objectives. As far as DLA Piper is concerned, we, I think, have gone way above and beyond that sort of approach to pro bono. If we just wanted to be able to say we have a pro bono practice or we do some pro bono work so we can put that into a pitch to a client, for example, we could do that with a very minimalist approach to pro bono. But what we're trying to do is really invest a lot. We've got, I think, about 25 full-time pro bono lawyers, 2 full-time pro bono partners around the world. We've got a very, very large, well-funded pro bono practice. It does support revenue generation because we do work a lot with clients. It is definitely helpful in terms of engaging our lawyers and keeping our lawyers happy in their roles, and it helps with retention and those sorts of things. But I think the reason our pro bono practice is successful is because it's authentic. It's not done to generate revenue. I don't have to report back to my board on how much revenue the pro bono practice has generated. They see that it supports our brand. So it certainly does help, but it's not the reason for doing it.
So, have you found any difference in the take-up of pro bono in your Asian offices? So you've got a number of Asian offices. I guess they've been growing over the last decade. What have you observed about, enforcing or implementing your corporate culture when it's come to your Asian offices?
I think the first thing to say is, in terms of the lawyers that we have in Asia, I don't think they're any more or less likely to take on pro bono work than lawyers elsewhere. If you look at surveys of lawyers from around the world, one of the things that's quite interesting is that a vast majority of lawyers will say they will do pro bono work if asked. It's more than 80% of lawyers will take on a pro bono file if asked. And regardless of where you run the survey, you get very, very high responses to that type of question. But then if you ask how many lawyers actually actively seek out pro bono opportunities, it's very low around the world. So as long as you're providing, and I'm talking about it, between 10 and 15% of lawyers actively seeking out pro bono opportunities. So for DLA, the key to getting lawyers involved in pro bono is to make sure we're constantly asking them to do pro bono work. Then the next step is making sure they come back and they want to do more pro bono work. And I think where DLA has probably failed in Asia in the past is in the work that we've been asking our lawyers to do. And I think a lot of the work that we've been asking lawyers to do in Asia has not been personally transformative. It hasn't been the type of work that gets lawyers to come back and do more. So what is the work that is personally transformative? And for us, as I said, the reason we're expanding more into legal clinics and access to justice work that really impacts the life of the client, is because that is the work that we know will inspire lawyers to come back and ask us for another pro bono matter. Where we've been asking in the past lawyers to do sort of corporate work for NGOs and charities, amending their constitution or reviewing their constitution, looking at an employment contract, undertaking research, comparative reviews of laws across different countries. The lawyers don't see the impact of their work. Often when they do that, it's not particularly different from their day-to-day work. And as I said, it doesn't provide that personal fulfillment that really inspires lawyers to come back and do more. So we haven't seen the sort of snowball effect that we've wanted to see in Asia. So it's been a little bit difficult, I think, for us to grow the pro bono practice based on that type of casework. So for us, the key going forward in Asia is to get people doing more access to justice work, interacting more with clients, and providing more end-to-end casework and representation for low-income individuals. And I think that will really transform our pro bono practice in Asia, and we've seen it that approach and that methodology be successful in other parts of the world, and that will happen in Asia as well. But the key for us in order to be able to achieve that is to have somebody full-time to generate those types of opportunities. The lawyers will do it. They will take that work on if they're properly supported and if they're given really high quality pro bono opportunities, and they will come back and ask for more. But if we don't ask them to do it and we're not providing those types of opportunities, people won't actively seek the opportunities out themselves.
What do you know about why Asian lawyers choose to do pro bono? Do you know anything about what motivates them?
Yeah, well, of course, because our job is to get all of our lawyers to do pro bono work, so we have to understand why they do it. We survey our lawyers and ask them what motivates them to do pro bono work or why they do pro bono work. In Asia, the top response is personal fulfillment, and that's the top response that you find in surveys all over the world. If you look at the LexisNexis survey, for example, in the US, you get the same answer. Personal fulfillment is the top answer. So again, as I said, we need to make sure the work is fulfilling for the lawyers. One of the key differences, I think, for Asia is we get much higher responses in terms of motivations to things like skills development and personal development, professional development. And I think one of the reasons for that is because in Asia, people get a lot less, the lawyers get a lot less opportunities to do skills development and CLE. If you're based in Sydney or in London, you've probably got 2 or 3 CLE opportunities a week. I'm not sure that that's the case in Asia, and I think therefore it's quite important to make sure the pro bono work we're offering to our lawyers does offer them the opportunity to do skills development and to interact with other lawyers in the profession. The second major difference is you see lawyers in Asia talking about pro bono as a business development opportunity, and you get much higher responses on business development than you do in Western countries. That could be for 2 possible reasons. I personally think it might be because lawyers in Asia are a little bit more honest. I think in the US, in Australia, in the UK, we're trained to just say this is an altruistic exercise and we're not looking for anything for ourselves. Even if we are looking for business development, we wouldn't tick that box. Maybe Asian lawyers are a little bit more honest. Maybe they actually do see pro bono as an opportunity to develop connections in the community and to improve their own personal reputation or the reputation of the firm, and therefore to use it as a business development opportunity. But I think because we're being told that's a key driver for pro bono in Asia, we are very conscious of that, and we are looking for ways to promote pro bono opportunities on the basis that this is a business development opportunity for you as well. And that includes things like involving our clients in the pro bono work we're doing.
But personal fulfillment still comes out top.
Absolutely, and there's lots of studies that show the things that motivate lawyers, not just in terms of pro bono, but generally are really the intrinsic benefits that you get from doing pro bono work. So helping somebody, mentoring a younger lawyer, working closely with other people in the profession, having an impact on somebody's life. These are the intrinsic motivators, and they're so much more important than the extrinsic factors. So yes, absolutely, that has to be an important part And we have to take that into account when planning our pro bono practice and working out what type of work we're going to do.
Now I want to introduce you now to Sue-Ann Chee from JP Morgan Chase in Singapore. And so Sue-Ann, we often think a lot about pro bono in law firms, and we don't often think so much about pro bono in-house. And some of us may not, myself included, may not know much about JP Morgan's pro bono work worldwide and in Asia. So can you start by telling us something about JP Morgan's corporate policy and commitment on pro bono?
Sure. JP Morgan's always had a long history and a long culture of pro bono, both within the legal department and in the firm as a whole. Our global legal pro bono program is actually structured around 3 pretty broad pillars of strengthening communities, empowering families, and advocating for vulnerable individuals. We've had a formal pro bono program in the US for a very long time now, and we recently kind of formalized individuals' efforts in Asia and only launched a formal program just over a year ago. The response from our teams have actually been quite surprising. We've since done about 13 matters in the space of a year and involved employees from over 8 locations during that time. We've actually had a very positive experience of pro bono in Asia for an in-house team. Part of the one struggle I think that we have is, as a bank, as a financial institution, we can't really be seen to be giving legal advice. So often the matters that we have to be involved in would straddle the middle ground between legal advice and a legal related issue. And often we're looking for partners both with law firms, locally and international law firms, to work on projects or matters together.
But can I ask you, what is the business case for JP Morgan? Why does JP Morgan do pro bono?
It's part of really the corporate ethos, that there is a big emphasis on giving back to the communities in which we operate. So that drives a lot of the, I guess, motivation for pro bono within the firm. But for the individual lawyers, I think, as Nicholas mentioned, a lot of it is about self-fulfillment. And I think the legal department ourselves, we feel that there's an added responsibility as lawyers to make use of our skills outside of just within the workspace.
I mean, when you're recruiting, do you find, do recruits ask you about your pro bono policies? Is that part of what you find you have to offer as part of your competitive edge?
Increasingly so, yes. I think it's still fairly new in Asia, but definitely in the US and in Europe, that is a big draw for attracting talent.
But less so in Asia for the moment?
Not yet. We haven't seen that quite as much. People do ask if you have a pro bono program, but I think, as Nicholas said, unless you offer up a lot of different opportunities, people don't actively seek out to find their own and bring it to us.
So I know your pro bono program in Asia is pretty new. It's about a year, you say?
Yes.
But what have you been able to learn from your own employees about their interest in doing pro bono, why they're doing it, and what challenges and benefits they're experiencing from it?
I think the employees' feedback has been generally positive. Again, the one area that we struggle with being an in-house team rather than a law firm is often we can't give the legal advice. So, for example, we have someone who was working on a family law case, not as a lawyer, but just as a volunteer assistant. And I think her concern was she had background in family law, but she couldn't actively advise. And all she ended up being able to do, I think, was to kind of provide a sounding board and kind of emotional support for that person. So that's probably the challenge that we have from some of the employees. But generally, again, the volunteer take-up has been more than I was expecting.
Nick, have you got any advice for Sue-Ann? So she's finding, so part of their issue, they have lawyers who are, they're not able to give legal advice, and they're feeling themselves limited in what they do. What could JP Morgan be thinking about to try and to respond to that?
Well, I mean, we've got similar problems in a number of countries across Asia. They're closed legal markets, and the international firms can't give local law advice. So there's a few things. I think we will do a lot of community legal education. In places where we can give local law advice, we will partner with our clients so that the clients are able to act through DLA Piper. They effectively come under our insurance policy, and they're supervised by a DLA Piper partner. So we've set that system up so that our clients can do pro bono work. So, you know, the corporates in the room will all know that partnering with a law firm is one way to get around those restrictions sometimes. But otherwise, I think, you know, community legal education is sometimes one of the most useful things you can do, and there's a huge demand actually for community legal education in Asia. The other thing I think is, if you look at legal aid across the region, one of the big issues is difficulty with the application process. So I think actually if you can start to grasp an understanding of the legal aid system in the country where you're operating, you can start to see clients who perhaps don't realise they're eligible for legal aid. And you can assist them with the application process for legal aid. So that doesn't necessarily involve giving any legal advice, but it's a really important step in helping the client to get access to justice. So that's something that we are involved in, would encourage others to get involved in as well.
Great. Now I'd like to introduce Tongi Lim now. So we've spoken to three suppliers of pro bono, three people from the supply side of the pro bono equation. But now we're going to go to one of the great customers, because Tongi runs the pro bono office in the Law Society of Singapore. So Tongi, actually, maybe just to start, I mean, I know a lot of people know you here. Maybe everyone knows you here. But just in case there's a few people who haven't met you before, just tell us in a minute about how the pro bono office in the Law Society works, and how you depend on pro bono, and how you get the services you need.
Thanks, Nicholas. So the Pro Bono Services Office is basically the Law Society of Singapore's charity. We run a full spectrum of assistance programs. We start with legal awareness for the public. We have a network of legal clinics throughout the island where members of the public can get pro bono advice from lawyers. We also do representation for criminal cases as well. And the fourth main component is assisting charities and social enterprises with corporate pro bono. So because of these programs, we need to be able to mobilize large numbers of volunteer lawyers. And what's essential is to hopefully get, especially firm support, to actually send lawyers our way as well. For us, we were set up about 10 years ago, and that in some ways marked also emerging trends in the way that law firms started to see pro bono as a business case. It came from two directions. I think one is because Singapore has a relatively open legal market, so a lot of international firms were setting up a presence in Singapore. They were experimenting with joint ventures and other forms of partnerships with large local law firms. I think what was very, very good was that because international firms put pro bono as such a core part of their ethos about whether or not it was a business case or not, I think that had quite an instructive effect upon senior management in these large law firms. Traditionally, in Singapore, you've always had many individual lawyers who've done it on their own, but this really marked a change where some of the large law firms were saying, well, maybe there's something to this, maybe we should start putting a bit more structure in the way that we support our lawyers doing pro bono work. So first off the bat, in 2007, Allen & Gladhill, which is one of the largest law firms in Singapore, they decided to actually have an equity partner doing full-time pro bono work, which is a huge commitment, and that reflects, I think, some of the what other international firms have done as well. Shortly after that, Rajan Tan, another large law firm, set up a Rajan Tan Foundation. So again, mirroring what some of the law firms, international law firms have done as well too. So I think it's been a very positive impact in terms of the leadership international firms have had with our large local firms. More recently, there's actually been a big push by in-house counsel teams, besides Suan's Bank, but your Hewlett-Packards, your Citibanks, your Intels, they would like their lawyers to do pro bono as well. So we launched actually earlier this year a guide with DLA Piper on getting in-house counsel involved in pro bono. And one of the areas is that we're looking at partnering in-house counsel teams with local law firms so that they can actually be involved in part of the process as well. The other main driver, just very quickly, is actually from the grassroots. Around 2007, when we were first trying to engage law firms to do more pro bono work, I kept getting stunned feedback from managing partners who were carrying out interviews with top legal talent. And they were quite shocked because there was a change in the kind of questions these candidates were asking. They were not asking, like, what's my pay package? Do I get additional wardrobe allowance? You know, that kind of stuff. They were actually asking the firms, what kind of pro bono program do you have? What opportunities for me as a junior lawyer do I have to do pro bono work? I think that's very significant because I think a lot of the firms have now realized that if you want to acquire top talent, develop them, retain them, you need to have pro bono as a platform as well. And it's interesting because I don't know what basically motivated this, but it's a case where you do have new entrants into the legal profession being very socially cause aware. Now, loyalty is no more in terms of how big the pay package they get from the law firm, but I think what's very important is that if the law firm gives them a platform so that they have purpose, they have autonomy, mastery for a good cause, I think that is an amazing way that you can actually get employee or law firm retention of some of your best talent as well. So, yeah.
I mean, so the Law Society, so you basically are the Bar Association of Singapore,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So have you needed to play a role in stimulating pro bono, or has it just been driven so strongly by the lawyers themselves that the services have just been flooding in? Or what have you done to be...
Well, I mean, frankly, it's an ecosystem approach. Apart from the large law firms seeing it as a business development case, I mean, we've had a lot of engagement and advocacy in terms of trying to promote pro bono as something which is good. So we do try to, as a bar association, number one, we introduced, aspirational target of hours of only 25 per year, 25 hours of pro bono per lawyer per year. We've looked at recognition, other forms of awards as well, but basically making it very clear that as far as the bar association is concerned, one of the key alignments for the profession as a whole is pro bono engagement. The other big area of support we've had is actually from the courts. In Singapore, we have a honorific for our top litigators, senior counsel. So very similar to Queen's Counsel that you have in the UK as well. And these are awarded to your litigators with the best skills, technical expertise. But the Chief Justice, who has the panel which selects these lawyers, has made it very clear that apart from looking at the technical excellence as an advocate, any candidates want to apply for senior counsel must show that they have a sterling pro bono record. So you can't ask for any stronger business case for litigators to do pro bono than get the necessary sterling pro bono records so they can get senior counsel status. If you think about it, it makes a lot of sense because senior counsels are leaders of the bar. They have to encompass the best values, and apart from being professional courtesy, surely they should exhibit a strong heart for the community.
So do you have any advice, for Melly and for Indonesia? You've heard a very different story where the law firms in Indonesia, they see pro bono as, giving free legal advice of the government or regulatory advice. There seems to be a bit of a twin track there, and people's desire to do pro bono work doesn't seem to be easily being met. So what do you think might change that?
Well, we had a great discussion this morning in advance of the session, and actually in Indonesia, they seem to have all the different pieces of puzzle floating around. I mean, they have the regulatory framework, they have very good initiatives around. I think what they do need is a unified message from the bar association structure. So it's a case where I think it's very important that if, as a profession, there can be a clear alignment, as pro bono is something very important, I think that would really help to bring things together.
Yeah, so I think that if I'm going to pick... Yeah, please, Melly.
Well, I mean, as you know, we have a complicated issue with the bar. I mean, currently we have 3 bars, apparently, and so I believe that in Indonesia, and actually this is what I would like to advocate here because I know there are many representations of global firms that actually have offices in Indonesia, is that we really actually think, when you talk about pro bono or legal aid, actually who's paying the bill? Somebody's paying the bill, right? Either it's from the state budget or it's from donors, or it should be actually as a concept of charity from the lawyers to do good for society as people that have special responsibility for the quality of social justice, right? So I think that if the global players are coming into Indonesia, and actually in a big way, and actually not in the most right way, they should at least be leading this initiative in a more concrete way, working with the NGOs and the legal aid workers so that actually there is a connection between skill sets and needs, and also mutual training so that the firms that actually have the funding, the allocation of resource, can actually be trained in the areas that are most needed, the kind of legal service that's needed. Because what always happens when I do things, my pro bono actually is in the form of my firm. We have 5 partners, and I've invited other partners from about 10 other firms to actually be part of the legal and regulation vice chair body of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce. And that's how we do pro bono, but it's actually for the business community. Now, if the global firms actually give a lead for basically ensuring that all the largest firms of Indonesia and the global firms are also leading the way on best practice, and working with the legal aid institutions like LBH and all the others and all the communities that are here, I think that there's a really great potential to mobilize the numbers of lawyers in Indonesia to actually do more good for society. And most importantly, I think, is to sensitize them to the community. Because I think it's very interesting what was said, that if pro bono work is just like regular work and you're not really seeing you're not really feeling the social injustice, it's not transformative. Because I know that I am actually someone that was transformed at the age of 18. I wasn't even a law student. I was in between break from Georgetown. I was in Indonesia, and I had to find something to do. And somehow I ended up working in LBH, actually as an editor of Human Rights Forum. But then I was asked by Mulia Lubis to actually join the defense team with Adnan Bayung Nasution and Luhut Pangaribuan at that time to defend General Darsono. And then so I saw all the political trials. That was in 1985. I'm dating myself, of course. And basically, then it's really transformed me as someone who had lived abroad all that time. And I was my father was in foreign service, and all I knew about Indonesia was everything was rosy. And I was so shocked that there was so much human rights violation. And it really transformed me, and it actually then encouraged me to go to law school. And although I ended up, for pragmatic reasons, because my then husband was a human rights activist, go into corporate practice to make a better living, I was always dissatisfied that I could not do more. And especially in the year 2000, when there was already reformasi, I felt more. I was an international partner at Baker McKenzie. I felt I wasn't doing anything. And I couldn't even speak up my mind, because you're not supposed to be critical of government or anything like that. And it was only when I set up my own firm that I could establish my own color. But still, it was still very hard to actually do things concretely, because a lot of information is divided between the civil society sector and doesn't actually transform to the bar, because the bar is busy with their own things. I mean, they're sort of have their problems, and they're more busy about creating training programs that are for pay, and they are not into the essence of actually making it a transformative tool. And therefore, I have to say that one of the things that we need to see in terms of Indonesia is that we might not be able to rely just on the bar, although I was very encouraged when I talked to Rifai, who's going to actually talk about what Paradi is doing, is that actually there's more things being done, which I myself was not conscious about. So at that respect, I'm glad that I came here. Actually, this morning, Nick was saying I was pretty pessimistic and cynical, which I am. But then I would say, but I'm encouraged because I see a big room of people in a regional network which is supportive. And I think we all have our heart in the right place. But I think we need to understand that this is a very consumptive era of people wanting to make a decent living. Even, I mean, it's not like the 80s and the 70s when the legal aid workers are willing to be really poor. I mean, now I see, legal aid workers, they have their laptops, they go travel all the time. They're not different from corporate lawyers, and so it's very different. And so you have to understand, where is the money going to come from? And I think it was Nick that suggested that, there is the legal aid with the government, but that's a limited amount. But donors cannot always be there, and I think it's very tricky when you work with private donors, because I think it doesn't become authentic, the civil society movement. So I think it can only be done through the law firms, and it should be done through actually the major commercial firms, which is interesting actually, mostly actually are part of what is called the Capital Markets Lawyers Association. So before there was Paradi in 2003, there were many lawyers associations, there were 8. And one of them was the Capital Markets Association, which was created by the Indonesian SEC to actually license lawyers that help in capital markets transactions. But then these people were basically kind of a different breed that had to do continuing legal education and so forth. And actually, this is one of the good elements of paradi. And actually, when the litigators sit with us, they say, you guys don't act like lawyers because you're so kind and polite and quiet. And they're always fighting all the time. So I'm just saying that I think for Indonesia, we need more support of the big legal service players to really work together with the grassroots and NGOs.
And so how are we going to do that? You know, because I think you made a really important point this morning. I mean, this is a movement, and you've said this one, you know, you're actually being inspired by what you're learning about what people are doing, and that's actually what transforms people. So in Indonesia, how do we actually bring the big corporate firms and the big legal service players into the market, into the movement, and get them and get them engaged and see what's possible, and then begin to change how they do things?
I don't know how it is, but I think it has to be a real experience. And I think this is also the financial challenge, because I think some of the transformative experience will be those that you have to fly to Papua or so far away, where you actually see what is the condition in the area. And so I think that if one or two people start doing that, and then they're saying that, and they're actually being rewarded in the same way as for doing client work. Because the reality is that, I mean, I know that pro bono is supposed to be a movement, but I remember when I was younger, I was sort of doubtful whether if I did those kind of things, would I really make the partnership track quicker? You know, because I think that people think about the financial line, is this a rainmaker or not? So I think law firms also have to say that, hey, if you're actually interested in pro bono, this is not going to penalize you from making partner. And that will motivate them, because that way they can be fulfilled. Because in Indonesia now, I look at people in government and parliament, I have no envy to be with them. I mean, I like to be in private sector because there is some sanity at least, you know. And so I think that if we could bring that, it would be the best of both worlds, because we have a very good talent, a very good pool of young talents that are very potential. And given the size of the country and also the severity of the problem, it's actually a country where a lot of progress can be made in a material way, say within 10 years with concerted efforts.
Nick, in addition to the work that the global firms like DLA Piper do directly in terms of the pro bono that you do in Asia, do you think that firms like yours have a role actually in working with partner law firms and the rest of the legal community in Asian markets, and actually being part of encouraging a change in thinking and inspiring and giving people ideas about how things might develop?
We absolutely see that as our role, and it's a key objective for our pro bono practice is to be a leader in the delivery of pro bono services and to work with other law firms. I said at this conference last year that within our firm, first of all, you have to do pro bono work to be promoted to partner. It's same as the senior counsel rules in Singapore. The pro bono work, it's part of your review and it's counted as billable work. But in order to get full marks in your review for pro bono, you don't just have to do a lot of pro bono, you actually have to create pro bono opportunities for other people in the firm. And in the same way, for the pro bono team, we're looking to create pro bono opportunities not just for people in our firm, but for other law firms as well, and for our clients. You know, we're trying to be a leader in the pro bono movement, so we really do work with law schools. We work a lot with other law firms, particularly other law firms in the DLA Piper network. So we don't have our own office in Indonesia, but we have a law firm that we work very closely with here. And we do work closely with them on pro bono work. And I think for us, it's about finding ways to collaborate with those firms that are in our network that are not part of DLA Piper, not financially integrated with DLA Piper, and also to spread that pro bono culture around the world. So it's a virtuous circle, really. It helps our business, it helps their business. And even if some of the firms in the DLA Piper network may not have pro bono practices of their own, when they see that DLA Piper has a pro bono practice and they see our lawyers doing it, it's something they want to get involved in. Sometimes it's about making a contribution to access to justice. Sometimes it's about getting to know DLA Piper and our lawyers better and networking. But whatever it is that motivates it, it does help to spread that pro bono ethos around the world. Even our own offices in Asia, you know, there may be people in those offices who are not naturally sort of predisposed to pro bono, but a lot of the pro bono work we do involves working across practice groups or across offices or across regions, and it helps to break down some of those internal barriers. So for DLA Piper, being such a big firm, in more than 100 offices around the world, it's a fantastic way to create connections, and it's all about making connections. And so, people won't pass those opportunities up. And we certainly try to create as many opportunities within the firm and outside the firm as possible.
Now, you see I've got 4 really excellent and experienced speakers here, so I'm going to give you a chance to ask any of our speakers anything you like. So, the floor is open to you. Who's going to be the brave first person to ask a question?
It is true that as a corporate lawyer, I've never been a corporate lawyer, but I understand from a lot of my friends, political situation might be really sensitive in our work. And trust me that there are a lot of layers, especially in Indonesia, in a society where their life is a mess when it comes into legal entity or legal engagement. For instance, there are 36 million of Indonesian children living without birth certificates. It means they do not have proof that they are Indonesian. It means they don't have any legal safeguard to pursue their human rights as a human being living in Indonesia or as an Indonesian citizen. A lot of times I encountered these cases that people are actually at risk of being stateless because they cannot have birth certificate, they cannot prove their citizenship. And that is as simple as because they don't have legal documents to prove that. And a lot of times we advise, of course, we advise them, why don't you apply to the office? But then that's because of lack of documentation, and they have to go to court to prove that they are Indonesian. So in this case, actually, I see that there's actually opportunity for lawyers who understand the law. That doesn't necessarily means to be vis-a-vis with the government. So actually, there are a lot of legal fields that you don't really have to be politically confrontational, that might put your diplomatic and also law firm at risk. But there are a lot of people that would actually appreciate your work on pro bono to help them. Because if this 36 millions, which is actually the population of Canada, they can get birth certificate, they can go to school, they can get their health insurance, they can go to university, they can be lawyers like us.
Hello, I'm Tao. I'm from China. I'm a lawyer in China. My question is I think it's for the lady from the JP Morgan in Singapore. I think, as you said, I think the pro bono programs is a part of. My first question is the pro bono program is a part of the CSR for corporate social responsibility for JP Morgan? Is the first question. Second question, if it is, the part of the the pro bono program is a part of the CSR for JP Morgan. What is the percentage? From the funding perspective, how much money, like if there's a $1 million, donors for JP Morgan in the CSR, how much will be put in the pro bono programs? The third question is that if, the pro bono program will be, carried by the JP Morgan, is it JP Morgan will ask your own lawyers to do the work, or will provide the funding to the external law firms or other NGOs? Okay. Thank you.
I represent a network called Social Corporate Law Society in Indonesia. It's a new network that consists of corporate legal practitioners. Basically, we have young lawyers, notary, in-house counsels, etc., but it's very small. So I'd like to ask a question to maybe all of the panelists. First and foremost, what type of incentive would appeal to law firms? But Amelie talked about globally linked law firms as well. I'd like to know from an Indonesian-based firm, what type of incentive would inspire you to open up your door to do more pro bono practice? And secondly, can pro bono practice also integrate the bread and butter skill set of corporate lawyers, which is doing corporate legal matter to assist NGOs, civil society, SME, social enterprise, in doing establishing a strong entity? The second thing that I would like to ask, because we're trying to establish some sort of also a clearinghouse to assist firms that are interested in pro bono, doing pro bono. What type of support or help can an intermediary provide you so that law firms can, and firms like JP Morgan, can have an easier access to clients, and also making sure that you have a strong profile of people that you help, whether it's conferences like this, whether it's something that is more day-to-day operation, whether it's, as you mentioned, sensitizing your lawyers, so it's training for your lawyers, things like that. Thank you.
The pro bono obligation more strictly, because actually there is already basically a requirement or suggestion that we should actually contribute pro bono hours every year. So actually, if that was implied and police, that would be very effective. But you know, I mean, for me, our firm does pro bono all the time. We do it without thinking. So, but it depends on the founder, really. I mean, but I think most people, especially if they've had a legacy of doing some legal aid, they tend to be and have been active in their universities in legal aid. They will tend to have the generous heart. So I don't think you should worry about that.
Okay, I'll go back to the first comment. And I preface my remarks by saying DLA Piper actually has birth registration clinics. We do them all over the world, and the issues you raise are very important issues. And we're absolutely committed to tackling those. But I think it's very important that we don't look for the most vanilla pro bono work that's not going to offend anybody, because the people who really need our assistance are not always kids who don't have proper birth registration. They're often people who will be unpopular. And as we heard from the first speaker this morning, you know, sometimes doing that work is dangerous. Sometimes it has personal consequences for the lawyer. Sometimes it has consequences for the firm. But we have to be brave, and we have to take on some of those controversial issues. Working in a large global law firm, there are perhaps more restrictions than any other. I think it's the most difficult environment to do pro bono work in, because you have to be very conscious about the political consequences, the commercial consequences of taking on matters. But we need to keep constantly expanding the scope of pro bono work we can do. And we as pro bono lawyers have to keep making the argument all the time, over and over again, that access to justice is for everybody. Even the most unpopular or unsavoury clients still need to get legal advice, and it's our job as lawyers to ensure that access to justice is for everybody, not just for the sort of vanilla pro bono causes.
Thank you.
Just to the second set of questions about our CSR program. So our legal pro bono program is part of the firm's global CSR. But in terms of funding and the choice of matters, that's left entirely to the legal department itself. So we do get some funding, but not as much as there's a separate JP Morgan Foundation, which does kind of charitable giving, and they have a much bigger, I guess, pot. Our program is more for our internal lawyers to get involved in pro bono matters. Often what we found outside of the US, and also sometimes within the US, is that we do partner up a lot with local law firms or global law firms on matters. So if that helps the business case for law firms, you know, we do look to build up relationships through our pro bono efforts as well.
Just very quickly, I just say that there's a huge space for clearinghouses to basically identify a full spectrum of opportunities. I mean, some may be, as Nicholas was mentioning, I mean, they may be a bit controversial as well, but which is important also to direct help that way, but also for the type of issue that you have mentioned, where there's amazing need on a huge scale as well. That's where clearinghouses can help manage that process, help identify, help capacity build as well too. So I think these type of issues are very important to deal with as well. Yeah.
So listen, I know you've probably got lots of questions, but we've run out of time, and I really don't want us to fall behind. So I'm going to be very disciplined, and I'm going to ask you all to give a big round of applause to our great speakers.